Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm gonna make a video just kind of discussing some thoughts and theories, or just some things I'd want to see or think would be really interesting to see in a sequel to The Batman. Obviously, some of these conversations are going to avoid spoilers, so if you've not seen The Batman, do not watch this. And also, it's going to be me retreading some of the things I brought up during my spoiler discussion. But to be fair, this is like me having like over a week to really sit on it, because that was recorded like May 7th, like a little after I saw the movie. So I've had even longer time to sit with my own thoughts, plus hearing other people's thoughts. And, you know, I just want to kind of share some of that. So obviously a big thing I'm sure a lot of people want to see in the next movie is what Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne looks like, because we didn't really get it this movie, and obviously that was a criticism for some people. I think it's because maybe I did a lot of mental gymnastics on my own, because I know Robert Pattinson talked about it at the most recent DC fandom about like there not really being a Bruce Wayne, and I think that's such an interesting thing, because the duality of who Batman is, like, you know, Batman being the real him, plus, you know, Bruce Wayne being the mask and everything, and obviously a lot of DC heroes really like lean into like the duality of it all, and I think that's I always think that's such a fascinating superhero like dichotomy to really kind of break down. And I like that in this, it's like, right, this is his early days, he's become Batman, all he has on his mind is vengeance, which obviously leads to everything going down in the movie, because his way of handling things kind of set everything in motion, like knocked all the dominoes down, and you know. And so I like the notion of, I'm curious to see what his Bruce Wayne is going to be like, how he creates his persona, because at the end of it all, he is going to be this symbol of hope. Now, it seems like Batman's going to be that for some people, which I know that's kind of an interesting conversation for some people about Batman being a symbol of hope. That's kind of Superman's thing. But I think in his own right, Batman, even though he is the Dark Knight, the Avenger who beats people up, I think he still is a symbol of hope. That bat signal in the sky, it used to just represent like, oh, fear. It now can represent hope. And I think that's also like the ironic nature of what is Batman. I mean, maybe that's just because I'm not about to have this whole conversation. Yes, I like Batwoman. You might not like it. It's fine. Whatever the case may be. But I like that even in Batwoman, they make the bat symbol mean something. Gotham went 3 years without a bat, and then they were so happy, like, oh my God, Batman's back. And then it became like, well, Batman's not here, but Batwoman is. Like, having a bat to be Gotham's guardian. That the funny thing is, it takes a dark night to shine a light of hope in a city of darkness. That, to me, I love that aspect. But, you know, obviously he recognizes a lot more of what he has to do now, not just as Batman, but also as Bruce Wayne. I need to come at this from two different angles. He was coming at it from one angle, because he didn't do much as Bruce Wayne, and even when he was kind of Bruce Wayne-ish, there was a lot of times he was out of the cowl, but even without being in the cowl, he still got the eye makeup on, he's hiding his identity, he's in Batman mode, even when he's not wearing the full-blown suit. So there were very few small appearances of Bruce Wayne, so he hasn't crafted the persona yet. And the question is, does he actually craft a persona, or does Bruce kind of just like how will Bruce Wayne be defined going forward? It's going to be such a fascinating element to see of, is he going to just be himself trying to, like, you know, be that symbol of hope with Bruce Wayne, you know? He can attack the city from two different fronts. In the shadows is Batman still being a symbol of hope, but also Bruce Wayne trying to mitigate and make up for all the mistakes of his family, which, once again, I am all about the, man, the Wayne sucks storyline. I love that. I love that thing, because the thing that I reference all the time that like really brought that to light was Telltale. And I guess that's not something that's happened too much in the comics. Maybe it has happened, but Telltale's Batman storyline is the main one I know that's really utilized that element of like, yeah, the Waynes weren't like the golden family you thought they were. They came with their own issues. I mean, especially once again with the amazing twist of like, yeah, Martha's in Arkham, which I've heard from people that's an element that might also be in the comics, or at least she's had connections to the Arkhams. Whatever the case may be, I think that's going to be an interesting thing, like, because the Kane element of Martha hasn't really, like, that's something I'm only in more recent years becoming aware of, like, the Waynes and the Kanes and stuff like that. Like, you know, I've heard people talk about it a little bit. Obviously, even Batwoman doesn't really cover that much, just because obviously what happens with Kate's storyline and stuff like that, yada, 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 so on and so forth. So you never really got to really dive into that. But her being like her being in Arkham Asylum, because that's the interesting thing too, because her being in Arkham makes it part of Bruce's lineage. Not only does he have the Wayne stuff as a lineage, but he also has the Arkhams. Like, Arkham Asylum is his. I mean, it kind of is typically anyway, because I believe, I'm trying to, Well, because I think in the Telltale Batman game, they made it so that, like, Arkham Asylum was already built and his family wanted to do something else. I don't think they built it. I think someone had said recently in a podcast I was listening to, they were suggesting that maybe the Waynes built Arkham Asylum. I don't know if that's always the case. But, I mean, it may be even more so in this, because for Martha, it might be, like, her lineage connected to that. Especially with the fact is we know she grew up in, well, not grew up in mental asylums, but she was in some from time to time growing up. So coming to terms with, like, hey, like, some of what I have in me might kind of be a hereditary thing I got from my mom, plus, like, you know, the Arkham side of the family, that might be something to kind of dive into. But, you know, dealing with both legacies, I'm really interested to dive into that, because it's a smaller part of the movie, but it is still about legacies going forward. And maybe that could be the next chapter in the Batman movies, is legacies, because there's so many legacies that are being combined, like his legacy as a, you know, as a Wayne, as an Arkham, but also as Batman, because who's to say Riddler's the only one he inspired the way he did things? You know, it's like, right, your way of fear, scaring, and hurting people, it inspired me to do what I'm doing. And that's, to me, that's always a dichotomy I love. It's like, oh, who brings out, do the bad guys bring forth the superhero, or does the superhero bring forth the bad guy? In this case, Bruce, being Batman, gave birth to a supervillain. So the question is, how many other villains did he give inspiration to? Or could it just be by giving birth to Riddler, he unleashed the floodgates, literally and figuratively, in the sense of, and boom, now, like, there's going to be more people who rise to the occasion because of Riddler. So it is a byproduct of Bruce, especially if they decide to go down the Hush storyline route, especially because that's going to be even more of, like, every version of you is being challenged in this moment, because they go with Hush, and it's like, right, your dad, no matter what his reasons may have been, maybe it was to protect his wife, whatever the case may be, your dad went to Carmine Falcone, and no matter what his intentions were, he got my father killed. You know, because we also didn't really get too much into Bruce's backstory, so we don't know if him and Tommy are best friends in this, whether, we don't even know if Tommy exists. I know they only talked about like, the dad and everything, so that could be an extra element of, like, right, trying to make up for your family's past, because Hush is going to run rampant and it's going to be your fault. He's like, right, now I know that the Waynes were responsible, you know. That could still fold into that, you know, and for unraveling the fact is that this new villain, Hush, is a byproduct, you know, but I don't know if they do that because Riddler was already kind of a byproduct of his family to some extent, so I don't know if they were kind of more so fusing those two together in some regards. I don't know. It'd be, but it could just, they could still handle it in a different direction. I'd be so fascinated to see what they do on that front. But another element I'm curious about too is, like, what is his circumstances going to be like going forward with the GCPD? Obviously, up until now, he's only had, like, a good relationship with Gordon, but going forward, I think after everything with Falcone and everything, and trying to unravel all the corruption, even the new mayor, like, pushing forward to find a way forward, we're going to rebuild that trust that I think there's going to be more of a union around Batman to some extent. I think he will be still seen as that vigilante, but moving in from just vigilante to being a hero in certain regards, that symbol of hope. I think that's going to be such an interesting thing to see them potentially tackle. Obviously, the Joker thing. Some conversations that have come up is, like, right, has Batman already run into the Joker? Because he's already locked up at the end of Batman. So the question is, could it be that Bruce already encountered him and it's just like a, hey, he's just a regular, like, guy, and then, like, he hasn't risen to Joker status, very much like Joker or even the Telltale Batman, because you meet him as John Doe. He doesn't become the Joker until, like, season 2 of Telltale's Batman. So that's going to be interesting to see how they handle that. And I wonder, will he almost play, like, a Calendar Man-esque role going forward? Because the conversation has been like, yeah, just because he's set up in this doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be the villain of the next movie, but he could play, like, a Calendar Man role where it's just like, or kind of like he could just be, like, the mastermind behind everything. He might not be, like, an active role in it, but he might be, like, the whispering devil on so many people's shoulders, maybe, you know, especially, like, how him and Riddler found each other, where, like, Riddler thought, like, oh, me and Batman have this relationship, now him and Joker have that relationship, that dynamic of, like, oh, we're in this together type of thing. Other things I was curious about, obviously the Selina Kyle of it all, and I've heard other people kind of talk about the fact is that much like how, ironically enough, how Robert Pattinson's more Batman than he is Bruce Wayne, because there isn't really a Bruce Wayne. Selina Kyle is more like, Zoe Kravitz is more of a Selina Kyle than she is a Catwoman. And I think that's going to be interesting, like if you add that element of while she's away, she becomes Catwoman. That next time they meet, their lines are so much more blurred than they were. Like, they had different agendas in this, but she wasn't like, they didn't really set it up to be like, oh, she's like this, like, big time thief. I think she's still in her early days, just like Bruce is. So it could easily be a thing of next time they meet, she is a lot more decked out. She is the thief. She went off and had her fun, did go on a little bit of a crime spree, made a name for herself. That, you know, maybe losing Annika and everything she went through kind of cut her chains free from Gotham. Everything that held her back, like her dad, Falcone, like now she's free of that to be who she needs to be, who she wants to be. Like some of those skills and stuff might be things she inherited from her mom, just learning how to survive in Gotham. So maybe it could be a thing of next time you see her, she is a full-blown Catwoman. And once again, that kind of puts her and Bruce at odds. But it's like, yeah, like maybe a mysterious cat burglar starts coming back into town, and Bruce has his theories, and then they meet each other face to face, and she's like, oh, I figured this would get your attention type of thing. I don't know. I think that'd be interesting to see, like, how they handle that character going forward. I mean, doesn't guarantee that she'll pop up in the second movie. If there's a third, like, maybe they'll wait till then. But I'd love to see that continued dynamic and situation grow. That's the cat and mouse that they always have, you know? More of the Penguin, obviously. Like, my current thing I'm hearing is there are potentially 3, maybe 4 spin-offs from this. One was always the GCPD thing, but I've recently heard things suggesting that they're changing that more into an Arkham show. It might have some of the GCPD elements, but it's going to be somewhere even saying like, oh, it might even be like a horror-esque show where we focus on the asylum, which could tie into the Arkham side of Bruce's, you know, lineage and stuff like that. We could kind of lean into it there in some of those elements, but setting up villains, which we'll get to that in a second, like some of the other villains we could see. But other than that, you could also get a, obviously we're getting the Penguin show, and then I've also heard potentially a Catwoman show, which could lean into the whole aspect of while she's away, she could go off being Catwoman, and be, like, this could be her rise to being Catwoman. It kind of feels in that, like, time she's away, that, like, right now, like, I'm in my year 1 status, like, already, and watch me bridge that gap even more while I'm going. So that could be interesting if they, because once again, those, some of that still rumor mill, the Arkham thing and the Catwoman thing, I think are still rumor-esque. But obviously, like I said, the GCPD thing was already there, but maybe it is getting more shifted into the Arkham thing. But bringing up what I brought up, the whole villain thing, that's good to me, is going to be an interesting element to see what villains they decide to use. I talked about it during my spoiler discussion. The one that I've heard Matt Reeves kind of throw out there is Mr. Freeze. He's one of those villains that, like I talked about it at a time, like much like Riddler, I wanted like kind of to get the Joker treatment, and I feel like we kind of got that with this. I'd love to see a Mr. Freeze thing. Granted, he doesn't want to do the more fantastical elements of Gotham, but I'm like, you kind of have to with, but I guess it's like, if you lean into just the science fictional angles of what is Mr. Freeze, because that whole thing is science fictional, then you can kind of get away with it. Like, as long as you probably keep it, like, from getting too crazy, you could probably lean into that. But I think it would parallel very nicely with the fact is that Bruce/Batman wants to be more hopeful, be a more symbol of hope, and you coincide that with a story that is like Mr. Freeze's story, a story that is so sympathetic of, I want to do what I can to help, because the woman I love is in danger. Everything I do is for love. And I think that could be such an interesting and sympathetic story that you parallel that with Bruce. Like, I think that'd be an interesting element. Now, whether they do like a one-off, like full villain thing like that, or will they do what they did with this, where it's like, right, there's Falcone, there's Penguin, there's Catwoman, but she wasn't really more antagonistic at all in this. It was just kind of like, she's kind of off doing her own thing, and it kind of slightly puts her at odds with Bruce in some regards. But, that and Riddler, like Riddler's kind of the mainstay, and like Carmine Falcone and Penguin have their own elements in it. So I'm curious, would they do that, or would it be like a full focus on one enemy? Like I said, would we do a Hush thing? Some other names that kind of come to mind, because I'm not well versed in all things Batman related. If you wanted to keep up the serial killer thing, especially if they would lean more into like the long Halloween, like I said, like maybe there could be like a Calendar Man-esque element to it. But obviously, part of me is like, Scarecrow would be interesting, but there's also, you into that territory of like, well, what villains have already been done cinematically? Now, the fact is, we're doing Riddler, who wasn't done by Nolan, but the last time was in the 90s when we got a Riddler. So, and we did Catwoman again, even though we did it with, you know, so that's why I'm like, I'm curious what Warner Brothers is going to do, because are they going to be reluctant to do certain villains? Like, if they get Matt Reeves like full reign to do whatever he wants to, which maybe they will, maybe they might. I think they're going to give him a lot of leeway. I think they did with this movie, but you never fully know. But I'm curious, what villains would they be like? Would they be hesitant to do Scarecrow because they've already done Scarecrow before? It's still in the general enough zeitgeist that they wouldn't do that. Same thing for Bane, even though it's like, okay, I wasn't the only one. Other people thought the stuff he injected himself with is venom. Because apparently, I didn't know this, in the comics, it's maybe at least in some continuities, maybe not all continuities, but at least in some introductory way, Venom started with Batman, and then eventually, like, it dominoed later on to Bane getting his hands on it. So there's that element. I wonder would they go through the trouble of making like a new villain, like Lady Arkham in Telltale. Another name I heard thrown out there was Clayface. That'd be interesting. I thought Clayface was always interestingly enough, like the cat and mouse element of a Clayface situation would always be really, really interesting. So that'd be pretty dope. Because the one that, like I said, the one that kind of comes, like, the things that cross my mind is, I don't think Warner Brothers pays too much attention to this. Maybe it's in their minds, maybe it's not. But the fact is, there are villains that are used on TV that I'm curious, like, would they even bother doing? Like, would they even do like a Deadshot, because they already used that in the general zeitgeist of the other DCEU, and the Suicide Squad and stuff like that. Because, like, the reason I'm also bringing it up is because I referenced Scarecrow. Scarecrow most recently popped up in Titans, and that was a well-established Scarecrow. He had already been Scarecrow and then immediately got locked up afterwards. So he was already, like, well-established at that point. You got elements of his origin story, but it wasn't really an origin story. So you got Scarecrow on that front. Would they do a Killer Croc? Well, Killer Croc, a version of Killer Croc popped up in Batwoman. Same thing for Mad Hatter, but those are like next generation ones. And once again, that's a Batwoman. Once again, feel how you feel about it. I really like Batwoman. I know that's not like the majority of people I've come across have not seen that, but that doesn't speak for everyone. But I just feel like the show isn't well received by a lot of people. I enjoy it, but that's just me. But I like I said, I don't know if Warner Brothers gets too caught up in like, oh, we use that villain on a TV show. But once again, those were next generation versions of that, because obviously in that, Riddler's daughter popped up, so we've got hints to the Riddler, but he hasn't ever made an appearance. His daughter has, did, and obviously ended up getting, spoilers, killed. But I could definitely see like a Mad Hatter kind of working in this world, or even, like I said, like a Killer Croc would be really interesting. I mean, he's also made a movie appearances too, so I'm curious about that. Like, obviously the one that jumps out immediately was the Mr. Freeze. I think that'd be so fascinating, because that hasn't been touched in a while. Because even Batwoman did his own thing with that, but there was no Mr. Freeze because he was already technically dead, so it wouldn't be like you'd be stepping on their toes too much with that. So obviously all of that was on the villain front, but on the hero front, like, do they ever plan to do a Robin situation, which would be interesting? Because obviously they didn't touch on Gordon having a daughter in this or not, so we don't know if there'd ever be a Batgirl in this continuity. Because you also, once again, Warner Brothers wise, they're already doing a Batgirl movie, so they probably wouldn't touch that. Even if they did, there's probably no guarantee she would actually be. Even if they were like, oh, this is Barbara Gordon, it's like there's no guarantee that she'll be actually, like, should ever become Batgirl. Maybe she just stays Barbara Gordon, you know, and they hint to her eventually becoming Batgirl. But also, like, it'd be interesting seeing a Robin in this universe, because I think it'd be a little reflective of Titans. Because of who Bruce is right now, granted, he is changing, so maybe it wouldn't be the same result, but I love that aspect about Titans, where it's like, both Dick Grayson and Jason Todd are like, dude, you screwed us up so badly. Your way of handling things, you shouldn't have done that to us. You traumatized us and screwed us up. And now, like, we're not well-adjusted human beings like you. Which this Bruce is far from a well-adjusted human being, so it'd probably be the worst time for him to end up taking up a sidekick. But because he is changing his approach to everything, this might be the perfect time. Like, would it end up being like the mayor's kid? Would he end up becoming like a version of Robin in this continuity? Because he jumps on the whole Batman thing. He's like, yeah, Batman, it's like he sees Batman as that, like, oh, like, you're a hero, like, I trust you. He was the first one to reach out and accept Batman's hand at the end, so that, or whether they just do a more traditional Dick Grayson storyline. I think that'd be interesting regardless. Maybe there were hints to like more Robin based stuff in this that maybe I've only seen the movie once, so maybe I didn't really pick up on that. But I'd love to see, like, I feel like if anything it probably would be a Dick Grayson type of situation. Like I said, whether they do the Batgirl thing, I think that'd be super unlikely, but you never know. There's also an element that crossed my mind, and I think I talked about this in the spoiler discussion. The movie keeps it pretty vague about Bruce's circumstances, like, you know, when he eventually goes off, part of his story is going off training with the League of Assassins, or Shadows, depending on which naming convention you want to go with, but like Ra's al Ghul or Ra's al Ghul hasn't happened to him, because the only instance to my recollection we really got in the movie was he said, oh, Alfred trained him a little bit, so we don't know if he got training from Alfred and then on top of that the Ra's al Ghul thing, or does that not happen, or are they keeping that vague because, well, Chris Nolan already delved into that story in Beginning and Dark Knight Rising. Like, that all kind of culminates together in that regard. So I wonder, would that be something they would be reluctant to like touch on because the previous iteration ended up covering that? Maybe the next movie will cover that a little bit, like I said, because they danced over that just because it's like, right, because this isn't a full-blown origin story, because like I said, it is the whole like aspect of, yes, this is him 2 years into it, so it begs the question, will that be something they ever bother tackling, or will they keep it just as vague as possible with its continuity? Like, they might reference like it did happen, but whether they'll fully tie that in, probably not. Just like I said, just because the Nolan movies are to kind of tackle that through line, so maybe they'd be reluctant to kind of retread that territory, maybe. I don't know. Obviously, like I said, these are just some of the things kind of going through my head. I'd love to get to know your thoughts. What are some things you would expect to see in a sequel? What are some things you'd want to see in a sequel? Do you agree with any of the points I brought up? Do you disagree? Those of you who are more well versed in villains, what are some villains that you would like to see? Like, I know, like I said, Matt Reeves doesn't want to do the more fantastical elements, but maybe there are certain villains that maybe you could tone and shift in enough of a way that they're not as fantastical, that they would still fit in this universe without it feeling a little off. You know, just let me know how you're feeling and thinking in the comments down below. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.